25.16 is going to be a wild one as we have a bunch of off-meta junglers like Sylas, Nautilus, and Kiana getting buffed. AD Mordekaiser could be a thing now, and Hexplate is receiving some massive buffs. So let's break everything down and provide you guys with an update to the solo queue tier list for every single role. And let's be honest, picking the best champions is fun, but is that really enough on its own? I don't know about you, but locking in Volibear just because he's OP tier doesn't really help if you're lacking knowledge on how to jungle efficiently. However, you can begin stomping your way at a low elo by utilizing our extensive catalog of jungle courses that are going to teach you everything you need to know to succeed as a jungler, which will have you speed running any game below diamond in no time. And that's just for jungle. Your mid lane OP tier Diana pick becomes actually unstoppable when you know all the essentials of mid lane thanks to the new 6-part mid lane series over on our platform that our top 10 challenger player Strompist has tirelessly worked on exclusive to our members. Our tier list gets you the right champions, SkillCapped gets you the right skills, and we're so confident it works if you don't climb 5 divisions while actively using the platform, you literally don't pay a single cent. So why hold yourself back this season and finally get the rank you deserve? And with that being said, let's get into it. So there's just one item being changed for this patch, but the adjustments are looking quite significant. Experimental Hexplate is going to receive an additional 20% attack speed and 5% movement speed on its passive. To put this into perspective as to how impactful this buff actually is, 20% attack speed has a gold value of 500 and 5% movement speed has a gold value of 325. So this buff is giving you 825 gold worth of stats for free. So this is definitely quite impactful, and of course Nocturne is going to be loving this. However, Noc is getting directly nerfed this patch, so that will kind of cancel out this Hexplate buff, and Noc shouldn't actually become any stronger. Olaf is one champ we're looking to see a nice boost in strength for 25.16, as he has liked Hexplate a bit in the past, and the item should become optimal now after the buffs. Renekton, Master Yi, and Aurelia are a few other fighters to watch. We could also see some ADCs like Varus and Zeri succeed more with Hexplate moving forward, so we'll be sure to keep you guys up to date over the next patch if Hexplate does become powerful on more champs. Baron is being adjusted for a second patch in a row, and this time we have more changes to its health and health regen. Baron will no longer have any health regen per minute as it's going from 1.875 to 0. Base health on Baron is going up from 11,500 to 11,800, and then health per minute is up from 180 to 190. So moving on to the top lane changes now, we actually have a very significant buff to Gnar with his Q cooldown dropping from 20 to 16 seconds at rank 1. So 4 seconds off in the early game is going to heavily boost the lane bully strength of Gnar, as being able to spam out Q more often in melee matchups will feel great for him. We definitely think this buff puts Gnar in a very solid spot moving forward, so we'll be bumping him out of the B tier and into A. Illaoi adjustments from last patch missed the mark, so she's getting buffed in 25.16 with her passive total AD ratio being increased from 105 to 110%, while passive cooldown is being lowered from 20 scaling to 7.25 seconds to 18 scaling to 7 seconds. We really don't feel like this is going to be quite enough to actually move Illaoi back into a powerful spot. Illaoi was sitting at a 47% win rate last patch after the 25.15 adjustments, and with these two buffs, we're not expecting anything more than a 2% boost. There's a chance Illaoi can move back into A tier with these buffs, but for now, we're going to be leaving her in B. Singed is going to be changed for 25.16 so that his Q will no longer deal less damage if you're playing him on red side. Apparently, this has been a bug that's been in the game for a very long time, so it will really be interesting to see how impactful the fix ends up being, and whether Singed sees a significant win rate boost. There's one more change being issued to his Q with the debuff refresh rate going from 0.5 to 0.25 seconds. Predicting where Singed is going to land power-wise this patch is pretty difficult, because this kind of change he's being given is incredibly unique. So for now, we're not going to adjust him anywhere on the tier list, and if the change does sway more significantly one way or the other, we'll be sure to update you guys in the mid-patch tier list. Sion is receiving a few buffs for this patch, with his passive base health cost per tick going from 2.3 scaling to 24.4 to 2 scaling to 19. E armor reduction is going up from 20 to 25%, and then our bonus AD ratio will see a boost going from 40 scaling to 80% to 60 scaling to 120%. So buffs that will more significantly help out lethality Sion. However, you will still benefit a little bit when playing tank Sion as well. Whether these buffs are enough to move Sion out of B tier or not is a bit of a coin toss, so for now, we'll be leaving him in B, but we'll adjust up to A for mid-patch if the buffs do land on the more impactful side. Mordekaiser is going to be one of the more interesting top lane champs to keep an eye on for 25.16, because there could be some new hybrid builds popping up on him. Riot will be buffing Mord's Q so that it now has a 120% bonus AD ratio. So if there's one AD item that could actually end up being viable on Mordekaiser now, it would be Spear of Shojin. We've seen these hybrid builds consisting of Shojin, Riftmaker, and Liandry's and other champs in the past, so there's a chance it could become viable for Mord. You do really want Rylai's on Mord though, so maybe something like Rylai's Rush into Riftmaker second and Shojin third could become strong, but we don't see Shojin as a rush being that optimal just because of how much Mord wants his Rylai. lies. Tier placement wise, this buff shouldn't suddenly turn Mord into an OP pick or anything, so we'll be leaving him in the S tier. Rumble is going to receive a few changes this patch that are similar in nature to the ones we saw for Singed. Just like Singed, Rumble has been another champ who has always dealt less damage if you played him on red side, so that bug is being fixed for 25.16. To compensate though, we have a bunch of other changes being issued to Q with the damage going down, and it will now take 3.5 seconds to deal max damage instead of 3 seconds. R looks to be getting a few buffs so that it's now more responsive, and that the zone duration is now consistently 4.5 seconds across the whole zone. So your guess is as good as ours as to how much power Rumble actually gains, because the fact that he's now going to deal more damage on red side is a bug fix that we've just never seen implemented before. We won't jump the gun and adjust Rumble anywhere for now, and provide you guys with an accurate update during our mid-patch tier list. We've had Warwick in the top lane OP tier for a while now, but that's going to be coming to an end in 25.16. On paper, it seems like these are power neutral adjustments, but let's break it down. So Warwick is gaining 5 base AD, however his passive damage is going down from 12 scaling to 46 to 6 scaling to 46. Now, very important to note here is that the amount of healing you get from your passive is directly tied into how much damage your passive is dealing. So it's not just a damage nerf to Warwick's passive here, it's actually a sustain nerf as well. With this in mind, we're expecting for Warwick to become weaker for 25.16 unless Trinity Force becomes super OP on him. With base AD going up by 5, it will give Trinity Force a lot more potential on Warwick because the Spellblade passive on Trinity scales off base AD. So for now, we're leaning towards Warwick losing a good chunk of power for 25.16 and we'll be dropping him down into S tier. However, there is a chance he falls as far as A because losing a bunch of early game power from the passive nerf is definitely going to hurt him. So for top lane in 25.16, there are two champions we think will be massive winners this patch, and they are Gnar and Olaf. Olaf is going to be moved up into the OP tier because in recent patches he's been performing very well, and the Hexblade buff should give him a really good boost in power. It's likely Hexblade is a second item that's going to be most optimal on Olaf, as rushing Ravenous Hydra for the sustain and wave clear is really important to have on the champ. Because Hexblade is offering up the movement speed from its passive, you don't need the active slow from Stridebreaker as much, so opting for Ravenous Rush is what works best in tandem with Hexblade. With a lot more players who will be experimenting with AD builds on Mordekaiser for 25.16, it gives even more indirect strength to Olaf, as that's a matchup Olaf finds a lot of success in. Riot's looking to give a small boost to Brand Jungle for this patch, with his passive monster damage going up from 240 to 260%. Q's stun duration is being increased from 1.5 to 1.75 seconds, and then R cooldown is going to be lowered by 10 seconds at all ranks. For Brand Jungle, he has been a 44% win rate champ over the past few patches, so there's no way these buffs bring him back into viability. However, support and mid lane Brand should be in pretty good spots due to the Q and R buffs. So after the recent Kraken Slayer buffs, Kraken is now a much more viable rush item on Master Yi, and it's going to become even better for 25.16 because Yi's Q is now going to give you 1 stack of the Kraken passive. So the upfront burst power of Master Yi when opting for Kraken gets better in 25.16, and it's not just Kraken either that's becoming stronger on Yi, as Terminus will also get stacked up faster with Yi's Q. It will be interesting to see how much win rate Kraken Rush gains on Master Yi because of this change, as rushing the item is very underrated right now. If Kraken does become the most optimal rush on Master Yi moving forward, then he could move up into an S tier spot, but we're not super confident that will be the case, so we'll be leaving him in A for now. These Nautilus jungle buffs are looking really interesting, as Riot's tacking on a bunch more damage to his E against monsters. As we can see in the comparison clips, E is dealing 182 total damage in 25.16, while it was way down at 108 damage in 25.15. So a 74 damage difference is absolutely insane, especially when you consider the spell is AoE, and when clearing out raptors, krugs, or wolves, you'll be getting crazy value out of this buff. We don't have a whole lot to go off of from previous patches to predict just how strong Not Jungle will actually become, because he's been a 40% win rate jungler with limited sample size prior to this buff. We wouldn't be surprised if the buff provided at least a 5% boost to that, and on the higher end, upwards of 8%. We can't really see it offering up over a 10% boost, which would put Nautilus in a very powerful spot, as we're leaning towards him being A tier or lower. So for now, we'll place Not in the jungle B tier and provide you guys with a more accurate rating during the mid-patch tier list once we get to see him on live servers. Rek'Sai is going to receive a base stat buff for 25.16, as her base AD is being increased from 58 to 62. These kind of buffs usually tack on somewhere between 1 to 2% win rate, so with Rek'Sai being just barely on the outside of an A tier spot last patch, we'll be moving her up for 25.16. Sylas is another off-meta jungler getting buffed for this patch, as his passive monster damage is being increased from 100 to 150%. So looking at the comparison clips here, if we use a full combo with Sylas, where we get 4 passive procs off, red buff was sitting on 2020 health in 25.15, and in 25.16, it's sitting at 1861 health. So around a 159 damage increase from last patch with your full combo and weaving in passive procs after each spell. Definitely doesn't seem as crazy as the Nautilus buff, but Sylas has actually been in a way better spot as a jungler than not recently, so it makes sense for Sylas to receive a lesser buff. Sylas jungle has been around a 46% win rate champ lately, so this buff probably shoots that up at least 2%. So we'll go ahead and move Sylas out of the jungle C tier and up into B for 25.16, as he's most likely not on Skarner tier level of weak anymore. There are a ton of meta junglers being nerfed for this patch, and first up is Jarvan. Jarvan's armor growth is what's been targeted, dropping from 5.2 to 4.6. Definitely not the end of the world for Jarvan, but it will reduce his power enough to where he no longer holds onto an OP tier spot, as we're moving him into S. Nocturne is next in line for some nerfs, as his armor growth is going down from 4.7 to 4.2. And then an additional nerf is being issued, with Q bonus AD dropping by 5 at all ranks. When we take into account that Hexblade is getting heavily buffed for this patch, these direct nerfs shouldn't hurt that much. At the very most, we could see Noct dropping into A tier, but with how much gold value is being added to Hexblade, we realistically still see him being an S tier pick, so we'll be keeping him there for now. We have a couple of Shaco nerfs on the way, with his passive bonus AD ratio going down from 30 to 25%. Q bonus AD ratio takes a hit, going from 65 to 60%, and then Q cooldown will be increased by 1 second at all ranks. So nothing too crazy here for Shaco. These are bonus AD ratios and not total AD ratios, so the loss in damage is not that significant. Shaco has just barely been holding on to an A tier spot in recent patches though, so we think the nerfs will be enough to warrant a drop into B. It's about time Trundle gets nerfed, as he's been the best jungler for a few patches in a row now. Riot will be nerfing his W attack speed, going from 30 scaling to 110% to 30 scaling to 90%. And then W cooldown is up by 2 seconds at all ranks. So the W attack speed change only starts to kick in when you are level 8, which means the early DPS power of Trundle is not affected by this nerf. Level 13 is where you will feel the effect of the nerf the most, as that's when Trundle will have his W fully maxed out. So more of a mid to late game nerf to Trundle, which will be somewhat impactful, but shouldn't completely remove him from meta. As a result, we will be dropping Trundle out of the OP tier, but only down into S. A few Xin Zhao nerfs are penciled in for this patch, with his base health going down from 640 to 620, and then Q base damage per hit is dropping by 5 at all ranks. So it's more like a 15 damage loss on Q because you have 3 charges to use. Xin had been an S tier jungler for a while, but because these nerfs are going to impact his early game strength, we think that they will land somewhat significantly, and we'll be dropping him into A for 25.16. Viego is going to receive a bunch of changes that aim to reduce his strength as a jungler while boosting his power as a solo laner. Attack speed growth is going down from 2.5 to 2.25. Q damage is up by 10 at all ranks. However, Q bonus monster damage is dropping from 15 to 0. Q crit multiplier is being lowered from 100 to 75%. Q mark minion healing is up from 50 to 100%. Q mark monster healing is down though from 145 to 125%, while Q mark champion healing is up from 135 to 150%. So it's tough to say how much power lane Viego gains from these changes, but for jungle Viego, we're probably looking at a relatively minor drop in power. Even with Q monster damage being removed, since Q base damage is up, it only ends up being a 5 damage loss in monster damage on the spell. The monster healing going down shouldn't really matter all that much either, as it's pretty easy to stay topped up on health in the jungle these days. So we'll only be adjusting Viego down 1 tier for this patch, going from S into A. So the jungle tier list is looking pretty spicy for 25.16, as there are a bunch of different champs to pay attention to. You'll notice that Qiyana is being moved into the S tier, and this is because she's getting a 10 damage buff to Q and a 10% boost to her W attack speed. In recent patches, Qiyana had actually been performing pretty well as a jungler, up around a 50% win rate, so with these buffs going through, we think that she'll end up in a really competitive spot. Now that Jarvan, Nocturne, Trundle, Warwick, and Xin Zhao have been nerfed, it leaves the OP tier wide open for Volibear to take over. Volibear is the only overperforming jungler from recent patches who did not get nerfed in 25.16, so he'll be top priority moving forward. And then, like we mentioned when covering Sylas and Nautilus, it's more difficult for us to give you guys a super accurate rating till we see them on live servers, but in the past when we've seen off-meta picks get buffed, they usually settle out in B tier spots, so that's where we assume they will land for now. So not only will these Qiyana buffs help her in the jungle, but mid lane Qiyana is going to see a nice boost in power as well. Its Q damage going up by 10 at all ranks for the first buff. And then for the second buff, W attack speed is being increased from 5 scaling to 25% to 15 scaling to 35%. For Qiyana's tier list placement, she'll be really close to breaking into an S tier spot for mid lane, but we think she'll fall just short, so we'll be leaving her in A for now. The W buff helps out jungle way more than it does mid lane, so we're not expecting mid Qiyana to gain quite as much strength as jungle. Mid lane Morgana may be the most sleeper OP champ in the game moving forward, as she's buffed for this patch with W damage going up. You max W out first when playing Morgana mid, so you're able to take full advantage of the buff, unlike support where you max your Q out first. If we take a look at how Morgana mid had been performing in recent patches, she's actually been doing really well, sitting up above a 51% 51% win rate for the past 5 patches, with a total sample size of over 45,000 games. So with this buff coming through, we could see that bump up to 52%, and it would then put Morgana in conversation for being one of the best solo queue mids. So we're gonna go ahead and place Morgana in the mid lane S tier, but if we're completely wrong on this prediction, we'll be sure to address it in the mid patch tier list. So it's overall a very light patch for mid lane, as the bulk of the changes went towards top and jungle in 25.16. This means there's not much movement on the tier list at all, as Morgana being placed in the S tier is the only significant move. Even though the Sylas buffs are aimed at helping him in the jungle, it's not a nothing buff for mid lane either, as your ability to help your team take down objectives does become better. If you're looking to secure early grubs with your jungler, then having additional damage on passive is going to help out Sylas mid lane as well. Is the buff enough to result in Sylas gaining any win rate for mid lane? Probably not, but if it does, then we could move him up to S tier for mid patch. The worst ADC in recent patches is getting buffed, as Kalista will have her AP ratio on E increased. E1 AP ratio is going up from 20 to 65%, and then E2 AP ratio is being increased from 20 to 50%. AD growth is seeing a boost as well, being increased from 4 to 4.25. So all scaling buffs here, which won't actually make Kalista any better for solo queue. Scaling buffs to a champion who needs to win early game to be effective are pretty useless, so you can expect for Kalista to remain a C tier pick for a while longer. Varus will receive a few adjustments for this patch that aim to reduce his strength with lethality builds while increasing his power with on-hit builds. Q damage is dropping as the base is being lowered by 10 at all ranks. E damage is going down as well, with base and bonus AD ratio taking a hit. And then W max will have more value moving forward, as damage from W is up from 6 scaling to 30 to 6 scaling to 38. So looking at how different Varus builds had been performing in recent patches, Blade of the Ruined King Rush had a near identical win rate to Ghost Blade Rush. So with on-hit becoming stronger for 25.16, we should now see separation between the two builds, and for on-hit Varus to become the most optimal way to play him for solo queue. How much power Varus gains from these changes is tough to say. We honestly wouldn't be surprised if his win rate dropped for next patch, because if players continue to build to weaker lethality setups, then that's going to drag his overall win rate down. On-hit builds should see an uptick in win rate though, so as long as you're playing Blade of the Ruined King Rush, Varus should be in a decent spot. For now, we're going to leave Varus placed in the ADC B tier, but there is a chance he moves into A for the mid-patch tier list. For the ADC tier list in 25.16, we have a few adjustments to discuss, as the OP tier is now going to consist of Sivir and Jinx. Vayne and Kog'Maw are being moved down into S because a duo that they are pretty reliant on for maximum success is nerfed for this patch, being Lulu. With Jinx and Sivir, you can pair them up with pretty much anything, as they're not tied down to playing with a certain archetype of support, which makes them very reliable for solo queue. There are so many good mage champs you can play bot right now, but one that just got buffed and is back in a great spot is Ziggs. If you just want to have one mage bot lane champ that you can pull out when your team locks heavy AD, then Ziggs is a really good choice. Just such a self-sufficient champion who doesn't rely on his support to be competent at all for him to succeed. Even if your support just roams all game, it's pretty easy for Ziggs to 1v2 the lane because of his long range from Q, as he can just spam it out on the wave and secure farm from a safe distance. There's only one support on the buff list for 25.16, and it's Zyra. E cooldown is going to be lowered by 1 second at all ranks, and then R damage is being increased from 180 scaling to 350 to 200 scaling to 400. So honestly, pretty nice buffs for Zyra. Lower cooldown on E allows for more windows of opportunity for catch plays, while R damage seeing a boost bolsters that level 6 all-in power. As a result of these buffs, we are going to give Zyra a push up the tier list, going from A into S, especially when you take into account that many other supports have been nerfed recently, like Braum, Rel, Yuumi, Lulu, and Nico. Relative power of Zyra has been going up quite a bit lately. So we went back into the patch history and took a look at how many times Riot has nerfed Lulu this season, and she's been nerfed in 4 different patches, now up to 5 if you count this one. That is just absolutely crazy when you think about it, because the champ has remained an S or OP tier pick all throughout that time, despite being nerfed repeatedly. So this time it's Lulu's E that they will be nerfing, with the cooldown going up from 8 flat to 10 scaling to 8 seconds. E damage is dropping by 10 at all ranks, and then E shield base value is being lowered by 10, while the AP ratio on shield is down from 55 to 50%. So will these nerfs really be enough to drop Lulu out of meta, or will it be the same story as the previous 4 times? Honestly, we can't see her losing enough power to where she becomes a weak pick. At the very most, these nerfs could result in a move down into A tier, but we realistically still see Lulu being an S tier champ, so we'll be dropping her from OP into S for 25.16. Rel is going to be nerfed for a second patch in a row, and this time it's her W shield max health ratio that's going down from 13 to 11%. Rel has been on the fence between S and A over the past patch, so with this nerf going through, we think she settles out in a good A tier spot. Health scaling nerf isn't going to hurt as hard as a base shield nerf would on a support champion, because you don't have the gold income to stack up a ton of health anyways, as this nerf would be way more impactful if it were on a solo laner or if jungle Rel was still viable. Everyone but Yuumi mains can agree that it's a great patch whenever there are Yuumi nerfs involved, and 25.16 is one of those. Q impact power damage is going down from 80 scaling to 380 to 80 scaling to 355. W heal and shield power is being lowered from 5 scaling to 15% to 4 scaling to 8%, and then W on hit heal is dropping from 3 scaling to 11 to 3 scaling to 7, with AP ratio going down from 4 to 3%. We've already had Yuumi placed pretty low in the support B tier during 25.15, and these nerfs could honestly be enough to drop her into C. For now, we're going to be leaving Yuumi in the B tier as we think there's a chance she remains in an okay spot despite these nerfs, but we will definitely adjust down to C for mid patch if the nerfs land on the harsher side. So we have some pretty clear winners on top of the support meta for 25.16, with Nami and Melio placed in the OP tier. Melio is such a powerful enchanter right now, as the skill required to play him at an impactful level is really low, and the more time you put into him, the more broken he becomes. If you're just going to spam one enchanter for 25.16, it should definitely be Melio due to Lulu getting nerfed. So besides Melio and Nami, there's actually a lot of really strong S tier picks and a good variety of different archetypes to choose from right now. For mages, Zyra is buffed for this patch, so she's worth considering again. Even though Braum was nerfed twice, he's still a solid pickup along with Leona, Poppy, and Maokai when it comes down to melee supports. And then there's a bunch of strong enchanters right now, as Sona, Janna, and Soraka are all great S tier pickups. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So there you have it everyone, a complete look at the solo queue tier list as we head into patch 25.16. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.